Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm Carshénah with vs.THE, and this is Screamtober. We're doing a video a day for 31 days up into Halloween, and this week is our most terrifying week of all, our franchise horror week. Let's see if your favorite is on the list. Let's go. Let's start by definition. A franchise or franchising is a method of distributing products or services involving a franchisor who establishes the brand's trademark or trade name and a business system, and a franchisee who pays a royalty and often an initial fee for the right to do businesses under the franchisor's name and system. Wait, let's back this up. We're not talking McDonald's, Burger King, or Popeyes. We're talking horror franchise. Let's start today with those teen screams. Scream, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Hello?
Hello?
No.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Moving on to Scream and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Eventually, the slasher franchises established in the 80s started to lose steam, and other kinds of movies took their place. But then in the mid-90s, a new slasher trend started. Wes Craven, having already created one iconic slasher, came up with a new one, Ghostface.
You like scary movies?
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a scary movie.
The twist was that the doomed teenagers in the Scream franchise weren't wide-eyed innocents. They were genre-savvy, cynical types who'd seen all the old horror movies and rolled their eyes at the way their victims sleepwalked to their fates. Heavily influenced by Halloween, Scream was a postmodern, self-referential slasher that showed even knowing the rules wouldn't always save you. And for a new generation of horror fans, it was terrifying. The Scream franchise has so far only had 4 movies.
Someone's out to make a sequel, so it's our job to observe the rules of the sequel. Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, death scenes are always much more elaborate.
One of which didn't come out until 2011, so it's nowhere near as long in the tooth as the other franchises we've discussed so far. However, with Scream 5 on the heels to come out in 2022, we can't wait to see how it will end or continue again. Scream 4 is, in some ways, a retread of Scream, starring a new generation of kids who've seen an extra 15 years worth of horror movies. You get the impression that the younger characters in Scream 4 would even roll their eyes at their counterparts in Scream. The whole point of Scream, really, is that it's in on the joke, and that self-awareness sets it slightly apart from the other movies. When it uses cliches, it's not by accident. It's because that's what horror movies do. And Scream expects its audience to be as genre-savvy as it is. If and when the Scream TV series starts, it'll be interesting to see whether it can play with genre tropes in the same way as the films have, or if it'll try to redefine the franchise's identity in some way. Now, in 1996, when Scream stalked and slashed its way into cinemas, the postmodern horror film about the masked killer bumping off teenagers was a huge hit with audiences and led to the series of movies. But how many movies are there? Here are the 5 Scream movies to date. Scream, 1996. Scream 2, 1997. Scream 3, 2000. Scream 4, 2011. And Scream 5, 2022.
Samantha, I know who you are.
I've been through this a lot.
This is your life now, which means that whoever this is going to keep coming for you.
Due to the nature of the Scream movies, characters get killed off throughout the series. The cast varies from picture to picture. However, the core cast include Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, and Roger Jackson.
There's certain rules to surviving.
The attacks were all on people related to the original killers.
Whatever his link is to our past, it's pulled us all back here.
Notable actors in the Scream series include Liev Schreiber, Matthew Lillard, Jamie Kennedy, Heather Graham, Drew Barrymore, Rose McGowan, Timothy Olyphant, Emma Roberts, Scott Foley, and Skeet Ulrich. The first 4 Scream films are the work of director Wes Craven. Scream 2022 is the work of directors Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette.
The most horrifying motion picture I have ever seen. This film is positively ruthless in its attempt to drive you right out of your mind.
Let's do it. Let's start with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In the summer of 1973, the cast and crew of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre were suffering through what was, by most accounts, a thoroughly miserable shoot.
This is the horror movie to end them all.
The heat and humidity were almost unbearable. The interior location, where much of the film's third act took place, an old farmhouse outside Round Rock, was dressed with animal bones and blood, which had began to stink in the broiling Texas air. The stench was so bad that some crew members were throwing up outside between takes. Directed by Tobe Hooper, then a largely unknown 20-something filmmaker from Austin, the film's painfully low budget only added to the misery. Funds didn't stretch to a wardrobe of multiple costumes, so the cast were forced to wear the same filthy outfit day after day in order to maintain continuity. Several actors, included 18-year-old John Dugan, who plays a catatonic grandfather, had to spend hours each day in stifling old man makeup. Marilyn Burns, who played the film's tormented final girl, had it even worse. She was forced to spend hours tied to a chair covered in fake blood. At one pivotal moment, a special effect failed to work properly, so Burns had her finger sliced open for real, so that Dugan's grandfather could lick the blood from the wound as the camera rolled. By the time the wrap party took place at the end of 32 days filming, just about everyone involved in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was tired, sore, and angry at Tobe Hooper. Actor William Vale still had the fading remnants of a black eye from where Gunnar Hansen, which is the big man behind the leather-face mask, had struck him with a prop hammer. Then there were the psychological bruises from Hooper's exacting approach. The punishingly long days, one stretched up to 18 hours or more, depending on who's telling the story, the multiple takes, his insistence that actors Hansen and Paul A. Partain, who played the wheelchair-bound Franklin, were kept away from the rest of the cast. Quote, "Everyone hated me by the end of the production," Hooper admitted in 2014. "It just took years for them to kind of cool off." As history now recalls, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre joined a growing club of low-budget horror movies that changed the genre forever. Even today, Texas Chainsaw is rightly mentioned in the same breath as such boundary-pushing features as Night of the Living Dead, The Last House on the Left, and Halloween. Indeed, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is now such a horror staple that discussions surrounding it have become well known. The initial shock and controversy surrounding its release, particularly in the UK, banned it for several years. How its intensity and style influenced dozens of other filmmakers and other movies, including Ridley Scott's Alien, then there's its other big talking point. How, despite the attention-grabbing title, the movie's remarkably low on gore. Instead, Hooper was sound, editing, and framing to suggest the violence and bloodletting. Texas Chainsaw came 4 years before the slasher genre properly erupted with the advent of John Carpenter's Halloween, and it's worth noting how Hooper's film differs from the conventions we later see in the dozens of copycat slashers. Hooper doesn't give the audience the release of a final confrontation between heroine and villain. The closest we get is when the Hitcher, played by Edwin Neal, is run over by a truck. The terrifying Leatherface and the rest of the cannibal family go otherwise unpunished at the end of the movie. The luckless Sally Burns escapes with her life, but not, we suspect, her sanity. Instead, Texas Chainsaw offers approximately 80 minutes of largely unbroken, unvarnished fear and loathing, a film that drags horror into the turbulent 70s America with its Vietnam War anger, Watergate scandal, and fuel shortages. It's raw, it's ugly, and it's from a raw, ugly era. As much by serendipity as design, Texas Chainsaw's lack of budget, originally set at $60,000 but swelled to something close to $300,000 during editing, is key to that rawness. The sense of death emanates from Hooper's movie. The sculptures made from bones, dried skin, created by production designer Robert Burns, sell the reality of the homestead run by several generations of unhinged cannibals. Hooper's frenzied direction and Daniel Pearl's inventive cinematography create an air of aggression and horror that gallons of blood and severed prosthetic limbs could never do. Some of the key sequences in Texas Chainsaw are created through simple filmmaking techniques rather than specific special effects. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, written by Hooper and Kim Hinkle, billed itself as being based on a true story. The opening narration says the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths led to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history. Hooper actually based the film very loosely on the killings of Ed Gein, which also inspired the horror film Psycho in 1960 and The Silence of the Lambs in 1991. The low-budget film was shot in almost a documentary style. No release date has been set for the next installment of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre saga. And if a horror movie becomes successful, then it is eventually followed by sequels, which is what happened to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Well, actually, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was followed by sequels, prequels, and remakes, and not all in that order. Some of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies followed on from each other, while others created an alternate and/or rebooted timeline. Here is a list of how 9 Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies in production order. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, 1986. Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, 1990. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation, 1995. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 2003. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning, 2006. Texas Chainsaw 3D in 2013. Leatherface, 2017. And now the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2021. If you want to follow the original timeline, you need to watch the films in this order. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation. Now, in 2003, Platinum Dunes New Line made the decision to reboot the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series to update the story for a modern audience. The 4 previous entries were jettisoned, and in their place stood a remake reboot which followed the same plot as the 1974 movie, only with the new cast. And despite mixed reviews, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2003 proved to be a huge hit at the box office. So, of course, a second film was put into production. The film was neither a critical or financial hit, and the rebooted series stopped after 2 entries. If you want to watch the films in the rebooted timeline, you have 2 options. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Beginning 2006. Or you can do the chronological order, Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Beginning 2006, then the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2003. 4 years later, Millennium Films' Lionsgate released another entry in this series, but this time decided to take the prequel route, perhaps taking inspiration from the Platinum Dunes New Line series. This film, simply titled Leatherface, was released in 2017 to act as a prequel to the 1974 movie. So if you want to watch the movies in this particular series, you also have 2 options. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974, Texas Chainsaw 3D 2013, then Leatherface 2017. But if you want to watch chronologically, it's Leatherface 2017, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974, Texas Chainsaw 3D 2013. Got it? Good. Now let's throw in one final film because it's 2021. Another movie was added to the franchise to further confuse new audiences. This film from Legendary Pictures is called Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is yet another direct sequel to the 1974 original. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2021 ignores every other movie in the series apart from the very first one, so just ignore them. Put simply, in this revised timeline, the only films you need to watch are Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974, then Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2021. But before you get started, did you know that across the course of the series, a number of well-known actors appeared in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, i.e. Dennis Hopper, Matthew McConaughey, Viggo Mortensen, Tom Everett, Renee Zellweger, Bill Moseley, Jessica Biel, Matt Bomer, Jordana Brewster, Scott Eastwood, Stephen Dorff, Lily Taylor, and Finn Jones, all cropped up at various points during the series, so just keep an eye out for them. But there's a lot of gore too, and that was the main selling point for each of these movies when they were released, each one promising a more extreme scenario than the last, and I think their reputation was well deserved. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'm Carshénah with vs.THE. We hope you enjoyed our Screamtober week right here on the channel. Make sure that you hit that notification bell, like, subscribe, and share, and we hope to see you at the next one. Take care.